This 23-year-old is our protagonist, Silas. He worked tirelessly, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, without a single day of rest, all for a meager monthly salary of just 1,000. Amidst this relentless grind, he found a glimmer of happiness and got himself a girlfriend. However, this brief joy was shattered the very next day when he discovered that his girlfriend had already cheated on him. But at least he got a humble family, a strong and powerful dad, a beautiful MILF mother, and a cute sister. However, other than him, no one else can see his family. One day, this woman with giant knockers came up to him and told him that he had been infected by an unknown disease and was now a psychopath, perfectly suitable for a job. How did it all happen? Well, first let's talk about our world. Believe it or not, our world's like a glitchy video game, endlessly rebooting. Just imagine, every time the cosmic clock hits snooze, the whole world hits the reset button. Don't believe me? Here is the proof. In 1518, in Strasbourg, France, a bizarre plague known as the dancing epidemic erupted, way before TikTok. It started with a single woman twerking wildly in the streets, captivating onlookers. Soon, more joined in this frenzied dance, continuing through the night. Before you know it, half the town's boogieing like there's no tomorrow. After a month, nearly half of the city's population perished in this manic dancing frenzy. Fast forward to 1960 in Massachusetts, USA, where the mysterious scarecrow incident occurred. In the wheat fields of New England, a scarecrow appeared. If you think this is just your average Halloween decoration, then think twice. Anyone who gazed into its eyes became catatonic, frozen on the spot with a vacant stare. This spread to those who saw the affected, rippling outwards until no one else was moving. Fast forward to 2005, Tokyo's Shibuya district was the scene of a chilling mass hallucination. During a lunch break, instead of daydreaming about anime girls, a group of high school students collectively dreamt of a red-eyed spider, sparking widespread panic. The following day, students began showing bizarre symptoms: twisted limbs, skewed facial features, and entangled hands and feet. Tragically, a gas explosion at the school the next day destroyed several buildings, with unknown casualties and survivors. The year 2030 is marked in history as the Red Moon event. On this very day, a crimson red moon ascended above, causing many to transform into crazed, cannibalistic beings, perhaps better known as zombies, humans from the outside, but no longer human in essence. In this chaotic world, our story centers on Silas, an ordinary loser struggling to survive in a post-apocalypse world in the reconstructed satellite towns. Living a life of relentless toil, his monthly earnings barely reach 1,000. Yet he considers himself more fortunate than many. Unlike those who are destitute and alone, Silas always returns to a home with his loving family awaiting him. He has a strong father, a MILF mother, and a kawaii sister, anchoring him in this tumultuous world. Under a haunting glow of a dark crimson moon that loomed ominously over the city's dense skyline, nearly filling half the sky, Silas made his way through grimy, dilapidated streets. He navigated through a narrow alley still wet from recent rain, arriving at an old, run-down building. All lights were dimmed, except for one room on the 4th floor which he thought was a shining beacon in the darkness. In the kitchen, his father was busy stewing meat, the pressure cooker bubbling and steaming, filling the air with an enticing aroma. His mother, elegant and composed, stood by the window, engaged in a phone conversation, asking the person to apologize for calling her sweater ugly. His little sister lay on the sofa, cuddled up with snacks, engrossed in an anime show on an old TV. The phone call seemed to turn sour, voices raised in sharp, jarring tones, where the other person had no idea what she is up to, and even called Silas's mother a crazy bitch. Silas had to walk the creaking stairs to the 4th floor, since the elevator had been broken for a couple of months now, stopping before Unit 401. He took out his key, opened the heavy door, and was greeted by his sister's sweet smile. He had brought her a cute teddy bear, which she joyously hugged tight, leaping up in delight. His mother glanced at Silas, ended her call, and urged him to change his clothes as dinner was nearly ready. However, before joining them, she mentioned needing to step out for a moment. With a nod, Silas seated himself at the dining table. But with the corner of his eyes he could see before his mother left, she elegantly picked up a pair of scissors from a drawer. Silas sat quietly at the dining table, waiting. His sister, engrossed in her own world, had modified her new teddy bear, its body awkwardly stitched and crooked, but she seemed to love it even more. Their father, sitting at the table, suddenly slammed his bottle down in anger, as he was infuriated by an intrusion into his kitchen earlier. Outside, the wail of police sirens grew closer, the cacophony of voices incessant. With bloodshot eyes, their father stared out the window, cursing the police cars and calling them useless as he flung the window open and told them to shut the F up. Silas's sister tugged at Silas's clothes, whispering that she was scared. Silas comforted her, assuring her it was all right and everything was okay. Their mother returned to the room, calming their father, urging him not to frighten the children. Silas noticed a subtle blood stain under the collar of her white sweater. Suddenly, their father exploded in rage, shouting, "To hell with the children, they all deserve to die!" Their mother, maintaining her elegant composure, retorted with a smile, "Yes, in your eyes, everyone deserves to die except you. You can't stand seeing them alive, doing better than you, more capable than you. You enjoy seeing them silenced forever." This infuriated their father further. Bony spikes protruded from his body as he lunged at their mother, and the entire building started to shake. The mother didn't feel any pain, simply looked at her husband, still in an elegant and firm tone.
What an incompetent and useless trash.
This further infuriated the father, who questioned her with a furious and deep tone. "Who did you call useless?" His sister, terrified, clutched her teddy bear, then her expression twisted into a maniacal laugh. "So fun, so very fun!" She leaped up agilely, climbing onto the ceiling like a spider, her feet hooked onto the light fixtures, gleefully watching the chaos below. Silas, amidst now the overturned dining table, where all the food had spilled on the floor, continued to eat the rice in his bowl, slowly and methodically. After the red moon, having a warm family was a rarity, even if they sometimes can be weird. Despite the occasional arguments and fights, it was still a home. Outside the window, directly opposite Silas's living room, someone was surveilling and stalking his unit. Through the lens of a telescope, they observed an eerily empty room, which was odd, as they were expecting Silas to wander in the room butt naked. Silas appeared to be eating alone at a table, but the room itself seemed to be in the throes of an earthquake. Furniture overturned, the light fixtures swung wildly, and the window glass occasionally showed a burst of web-like cracks, as if struck by some unseen force. One of the observers said the Observer 13 was identified as experiencing a psychic anomaly. A man in the background, sitting in a chair and not allowing us to see his face, questioned the short-haired women a few times, inquiring if Silas had the potential to be recruited, the extent of the potential threat he posed, and the specifics of his abilities. The woman shook her head, as she had very limited info about Silas. All they knew right now was that Silas seemed normal enough, maintaining a regular work schedule, had no social life, no girlfriend, and a company slave, also 13th day in on his no-nut November. The man snapped his fingers, intrigued by Silas. He asked if a dreamweaver had ever entered Silas's dreams for an assessment. The woman took a drag of her cigarette and casually replied, "Yes, but after entering his dreams, the dreamweaver never returned." The next day, Silas returned to his office, a space divided into numerous small cubicles by partitions, bustling with activity. He was seen assisting a newcomer, which drew many dissatisfied glances and hushed whispers from the surrounding cubicles. Despite the palpable displeasure and taunts of his colleagues, saying already working 16-hour days and still trying to help a newcomer, Silas ignored these words and efficiently organized the newcomer's documents, dismissing the newcomer's thanks with a casual wave. Not long after, he was visited by a coworker who came to summon him to the director's office. In the office, the director handed him a file and told him to deliver it to a cafe on a street corner in a nearby town. Silas didn't understand why he was assigned, as this isn't usually his responsibility. Afraid of losing his job, he chose not to question it. Before he left, He couldn't help but notice a short-haired woman in the room, wearing a well-tailored suit and sunglasses, with noticeably long legs and a large pair of boings. Although Silas is a lonely virgin, he ain't no simp, and he is halfway into No Nut November, so he quickly leaves the room. As soon as he left, the director's demeanor changed completely, eagerly informing the woman that he had done everything he was told. He was acting as if he was awaiting a treat. When the topic shifted to an upcoming project, and whether it would be given to his company, the woman stood up, smiled, and decisively stated that the project wouldn't be given to them. The director was shocked and thought he had misheard. The woman gently removed her sunglasses, speaking softly yet firmly voice. But the moment they made eye contact, he saw a crimson-red pair of eyes. The woman, with a hypnotic command, told the director to forget everything that had happened there. She put her sunglasses back on and left the office. Silas arrived at the subway station, finding the place to be very crowded. Noticing a pregnant woman, he courteously offered her his seat. As he stood, his sister, clutching her makeshift teddy bear, crawled along the ceiling of the cabin towards him. She dangled in front of him, swinging back and forth like a pendulum. Silas pretended not to see her, wondering why she followed him here. His sister, finding joy in her game, swung more vigorously, causing the entire cabin to tremble. Some people began to panic, however. The cabin soon returned to normal. She asked Silas if he wanted to play, but he quietly told her that he couldn't talk to her in public. Otherwise, he would be thought crazy. With a playful stick of her tongue, she drew close and warned him to be careful, hinting at something amiss about where he was headed. Before Silas could probe further, she giggled and dashed away, pinching a fat man's cheek as she passed. The fat man jolted awake, exclaiming loudly, "Who touched me?" The other passengers cast puzzled glances at the fat man, who was surrounded by empty space. After alighting from the train, Silas followed his GPS to the designated cafe. He found the ambiance unsettlingly dark and oppressive, with trash strewn about the entrance, adding to a sense of creepiness. Unbeknownst to him, a group was monitoring and stalking him from a nearby tall building. Armed soldiers were also poised for action, lay in wait in the corners. The short-haired woman held a file containing Silas's personal information, as well as a document designating the cafe as a Level 1 psychic contamination zone. The file outlined a few things. People near the cafe felt an irresistible pull to enter. Within 3 to 5 days of visiting, they would die, often by suicide. Analysis suggested that exposure inside the cafe led to severe depression. The woman glanced over the documents and then asked her assistant if the backup was ready. An assistant nodded, pointing to a girl in a dress playing with a butterfly in the next room. When Silas entered the cafe, he was enveloped in a warm, bustling atmosphere, contrary to the somewhat grim exterior. The cafe was crowded, every patron wearing a smile. He made his way to the bar and handed over the file. The barista, with a comforting and genuine smile, thanked him and offered a complimentary cup of coffee. Silas, initially reluctant to stay, found the aroma enticing. He had never had this top-notch coffee before. As he lifted the cup, just about to give it a try, his gaze froze. Behind the barista's neat apron, a grotesque tentacle emerged, something he thought he'd only see on some inappropriate websites. The tentacle suddenly spread open, revealing a gruesome mouth secreting something into the coffee. Silas looked down to find an eye in his coffee, staring back at him. He shifted his gaze back and forth, unsure what was going on. Is he having hallucinations due to overworking? Why are the people in the cafe not seeing what he is seeing? He closed and opened his eyes, repeatedly checking the coffee again. The eye inside stared back at him. Barista's smile grew even more cordial, urging Silas to drink quickly. Although he could see the tentacle, Silas knew he needed to act normal and get the hell out of there. He politely declined, saying he had enough coffee that day, and turned to leave. As he reached the door, he cast a glance back. To his horror, everyone in the cafe had ceased their actions and were staring at him. A collective, dazed yet vacant gaze. With a jolt of fear, he quickly turned and hastened his pace. He slammed the door open and sprinted out, running as fast as he could to get the hell out of this creepy place. The people watching Silas from the distant building. The observers watched in disbelief as Silas emerged unscathed from the cafe. The violent confrontation they had anticipated did not happen. They planned this to test Silas's potential and uncover the source of contamination in the cafe. Yet, all they saw was observer number 13 entering the cafe and then walking out unharmed. Biting her fingernail, the woman in charge briefly showed confusion before resolutely ordering, "Continue monitoring and immediately implement Plan D." Silas hurried to the subway station, desperate to get home, still unsure of what he had witnessed in the cafe. He realized that his sister's warning must have been about this. The station was deserted, other than the elderly security guard dozing in the duty room. Silas sat on a bench, finally allowing himself a moment of relief. Ever since the blood moon, he had heard that the massive city walls separated them from the monsters outside. Yet the scene he witnessed in the cafe seemed nothing normal. Doubts nagged at him. Perhaps his family held some answers. He resolved to ask them once he returned. For now, he took a deep breath, his thoughts swirling as he waited for the subway. Suddenly, he heard the sound of shoes scraping the floor. Looking up, he saw a group of people entering the station, moving towards him. A surge of panic hit him as he recognized them as the patrons from the cafe. He jerked up, spotting the barista from the distance, still wearing that amiable smile, holding the coffee Silas had refused. The barista's mouth slowly stretched into an eerie grin as he approached Silas, saying, "You haven't finished your coffee yet." In a panic, Silas stood to flee, only to find himself surrounded. The once warm and cheerful patrons of the cafe now approached him like emotionless zombies. As he protested, saying he couldn't afford the coffee, the barista's smile twisted into a more sinister expression, saying either drink it or he will shove it up Silas's ass. The eye that had been floating in the coffee leaped out, streaking toward Silas's mouth. Shocked, Silas forcefully pushed his way through the crowd, but he was gripped from behind, flinging him back into the crowd. His struggles grew weaker as he was pinned down by over a dozen zombies. The people in the monitoring room were baffled as to why Silas was so easily subdued, appearing just like an ordinary person. The woman in charge realized they needed to end this. Just as the woman issued orders to send reinforcements, the girl snapped her umbrella shut, signaling readiness for dispatch. Abruptly, an alert staff member's shout pierced the room, urging everyone to check the machine for an unexpected surge in the wavelength. In the subway, Silas, pinned down and mouth pried open, heard a soft laugh. Glancing up, he saw his sister hanging from a sign, holding her teddy bear and swinging. With his mouth held open, Silas's plea for help was muffled. His sister, half joking, demanded the best toy in exchange for her help. Just as the eye reached Silas's mouth, his sister let out a giggle as she leaped down, swiftly blending into the crowd. Within moments, she found Silas and grasped his hand. A little yet cold hand grasped his arms. Suddenly, one of Silas's eyes turned red, and with a cold laugh, he swiftly moved through the crowd with his sister on his back. The people in the monitoring room watched in disbelief as Silas's agility and precise body control, as data started to pour in, indicative of Silas' spider trait. The initial estimate suggested that Silas's potential exceeded 50%. In the building, all of them were both shocked and excited, watching Silas dash towards the exit. However, a change on the screen prompted an alarmed shout. Outside the subway, Silas, holding his sister's hand, was about to break free when the barista, with a bizarre and deepening smile, unleashed numerous tentacles, none of which could touch Silas. As the barista unleashed a flurry of tentacles towards Silas, he and his sister deftly maneuvered through the disgusting tentacles. With her aid, they nimbly dodged each attack, making a swift beeline for the subway exit. In mere seconds, Silas appeared outside the subway station. The short-haired woman in the monitoring room took a deep breath, preparing to wrap up the operation. But then, an observer shouted in astonishment, "Look at this!" Everyone turned to the screen to see Silas hanging upside down from the station roof, slowly turning his head and crooking his finger forward in a taunting gesture. The atmosphere in the monitoring room grew tense. the staff exchanging uncertain looks. It was clear to them that Silas was taunting the barista. But why? What kind of person, instead of fleeing, would turn back to provoke such monsters? Meanwhile, Silas, in shock, asked his sister why they weren't escaping. But she, unfazed, pulled him back into the subway, puzzled by his fear. She pointed at the barista, her low laughter tinged with defiance, saying they shouldn't be the ones running, it's him, pointing to the barista. He should be running from us. The barista, seeing Silas not fleeing but instead turning to face him, transformed into a mass of tentacles, with eyes and sharp teeth which made Silas shudder. "Let's run!" His sister, however, was exhilarated. "I'm not running away, look how cute it is," she said, leaping towards the creature. Meanwhile, in the monitoring room, a staff member frantically typed on his keyboard, announcing that psychic energy levels had reached their peak. The woman with short hair took a deep breath, unsure of what to do next. Normally, a spider trait like Silas, without specialized weapons, would stand no chance against such a psychic trait monster. Yet Silas fearlessly charged at it. What is his problem? Back in the subway station, countless tentacles attacked Silas. Although terrifying, none could touch him. Quickly, Silas reached towards the barista. Then, with a swift movement, he dashed beside the barista. He grabbed one of the barista's arms and tore it right off, causing the barista to let out a chilling scream. At that very moment, the screen in the monitoring room went black, with fuzz all over the screen. They knew the cameras in the subway station were destroyed by the psychic energy. Realizing they could wait no longer, the woman ordered her team to take action. In the subway station, Silas's sister let out a mocking laugh, her eyes shining with frenzied excitement. In front of them, numerous sinister tentacles lashed out. Silas grabbed a tentacle and tore it off. The creature screamed in pain, and Silas's excitement intensified. He continued ripping off the long tentacles, one after another, and the creature's howls turned to whimpers. Its fear was evident as it attempted to flee. Unwilling to let the creature off easily, Silas's sister was just warming up. With a determined pull, she dragged the monster back, methodically tearing its tentacles apart one by one. As each tentacles fell, the scream only made them more excited. The monster's eyes filled with unmistakable fear. With every step the siblings took forward, the creature retreated, its instinct for survival kicking in. Seizing an opportunity, it leaped up and dashed towards the exit in a desperate escape bid. Silas and his sister exchanged a cold, knowing grin before swiftly pursuing the fleeing monster. But Silas pursued, leaping onto the wall and ripping a thin iron pipe from it, and jumped high in the air and stabbed the creature fiercely. In a desperate struggle, the creature's tentacles tensed and then split apart, transferring to smaller bodies while hopping onto the nearby zombies in an attempt to escape. Everything happened in an instant, only heightening the excitement for the duo. Calm and composed, they observed the fleeing zombies with keen eyes. Determined not to let them escape so easily, Silas, eyes ablaze with madness and thrill, quickly dispatched a nearby old woman zombie and then a second zombie. He swiftly shifted his focus from one target to the next. First the second, then seamlessly onto the third, and without missing a beat, he turned to the fourth. Not long after, the subway station lay in ruins. With countless zombie bodies lying on the subway floor, however, a few managed to escape. Just as he thought everything was over, a slight noise caught his attention. Turning sharply, Silas saw the old security guard in the booth, staring at him in horror. Silas's face twisted into a distorted, excited grin. In a flash, he was at the booth, reaching for the guard. Enraged, Silas grabbed his sister, pulling her back forcefully. She seemed upset initially, but softened at Silas's stern expression. Silas issued a stern warning to his sister, cautioning her against harming the innocent. "Listen to me," he said firmly, "or you'll lose the privilege of having any more toys," wrapping her arms around his waist, pleading for his forgiveness, saying she only wanted to protect him. Silas tousled her hair. While enjoying the patting, she warned Silas that others were approaching and that they should be on their way. Clutching her teddy bear that she had retrieved from the floor, she followed her brother as they both made their way out of the subway station. Suddenly, the deserted station was filled with people. A girl with an umbrella appeared out of nowhere. followed by the woman on a motorcycle. Soon, the entire station was under lockdown. Silas and his sister watched from atop a high building, observing the scene below.
How you gonna thank me, big brother?
His sister's voice rang out. She sat beside him, clutching her teddy bear. Reflecting on her earlier actions, Silas felt a mix of emotions but managed to express his gratitude. His sister, her hair falling softly around her face, asked for a new toy in return. Silas pointed out she already had one, and she hugged the teddy bear tighter. Her voice was filled with excitement as she described wanting a toy that could talk, preferably one that could scream, the louder the better. Silas suddenly thought of a screaming chicken toy. His sister, initially excited, fell silent for a moment. She looked at Silas for a while, looking quite upset, then suddenly stood up, telling Silas he was boring, and she didn't want to play with him anymore. Walking on the power lines, his sister suddenly turned to Silas and warned him that someone was watching him. When Silas inquired who it might be, she playfully refused to tell him. With a giggle, she quickly scampered across the wire to the opposite side and disappeared. Remaining vigilant, Silas leaped from the apartment building across to the neighboring one and hurried down the stairs. First, he cautiously scanned the surroundings for any signs of danger. Finding none, he turned his gaze to the bustling street, realizing that the commotion provided the perfect cover for his escape. He was about to blend in with the crowd when a sudden voice calling his name startled him. Silas hesitantly turned around to find a woman smiling at him. With a warm and inviting expression, she suggested they go out for coffee. He saw a woman with short hair, striking features, and a voluptuous large pair of boing standing beside a black Jeep. As someone who had been single since birth and had never been approached by women in ever, Silas found the invitation strange. Remembering his sister's warning, he cautiously declined the coffee. Then, locking eyes with the woman, Silas realized she wouldn't let him off easily. Taking a deep breath to steady himself, he politely declined the coffee offer, suggesting instead that they could go out for something different, as he had already had way too much coffee today. The woman, seemingly surprised by Silas's composure, then suggested going to a bar. As she held the passenger door open, Silas hesitated before finally sliding into the seat. The journey was marked by an awkward silence, with the woman remaining completely silent throughout. At the bar, a bartender served them a bottle of wine and left, leaving them alone. The woman introduced herself as Isabella and admitted that she was behind the day's events, but assured Silas she meant no harm. Speaking candidly, she placed a green-covered ID in front of him, revealing her status and high-ranking position. Yet Silas remained puzzled as to why such a person would seek him out for a drink. Whether by design or accident, the woman allowed Silas to glimpse the gun she carried. Silas, regaining his composure, asked her why she was doing this. As Isabella opened the wine and poured herself another glass, she explained that she belonged to an organization dedicated to cleaning up contamination zones in the city. Since the Red Moon, her team had been involved in the reorganization of major cities and satellite towns, while also dealing with the zombies outside the city walls, combating the two infamous organizations, the Wilderness Knights and Psychic Cults, also maintaining orders within the walls. Their primary focus right now is on contamination incidents in the main city and 5 major satellite towns. This was a lot for Silas to take in. The woman further explained that the situation he witnessed in the cafe was an example of such contamination. She handed him a folder. As Silas perused the document, Isabella lit a cigarette and elaborated that after the Red Moon, 70% of the world's population turned crazy. Those who were lucky to survive and now living inside these tall walls around them were not necessarily normal either. Some of these people were referred to as contaminated. Silas listened as Isabella said the contamination was like a contagious virus, but more dangerous. Once infected, individuals could become extremely violent and lose their minds. They will begin to harm others or themselves. They might appear normal on the surface, but inside, irreversible changes had occurred. The people in the cafe were heavily contaminated and beyond cure. Even killing the source of infection, the barista, wouldn't help. Standing up, Isabella informed Silas that although he had got rid of the monster, those deeply infected individuals were still out there, potentially becoming new sources of infection. Silas steadied his emotions but couldn't resist asking the question that had been on his mind. Silas turned to Isabella with a curious expression. He glanced towards her large pair of boings, as he wanted to know Isabella's cup size, but in all seriousness, if it was so dangerous, why had she sent him into the cafe? Wasn't she worried he might become contaminated? Isabella wasn't surprised by the question, even finding it odd that Silas only asked it now. She assured him that he wouldn't be contaminated, or rather, he was already contaminated in a different way. Silas's expression turned bewildered. The woman then showed him his own file. Lighting another cigarette, she explained that after the red moon, some individuals underwent a mental mutation. They could see things ordinary people couldn't, gaining new abilities, and Silas was among them. According to the analysis of Silas's abilities, he had unusual control over his body. She mentioned a member of their organization, known as Gecko, who had an astounding 80% control over his body. Gecko was exceptionally powerful, capable of dodging bullets, expertly handling various firearms, squeezing through tiny gaps the size of a teacup, and effortlessly climbing skyscraper walls. This type of ability was categorized as a spider trait. Much like a spider, individuals with spider traits will have similar precision to a spider, masterfully controlling its muscles, body, limbs, and bones. This meticulous control endowed them with abilities akin to superhuman strength, speed, and reaction time, and clearly, Silas was also one of them. This meant that Silas could perceive things invisible to others, making him particularly suited for contamination cleanup work. Silas left the bar to catch a bus. On the bus, he recalled Isabella slipped 10,000 into his pocket. Shaking his head, Silas wasn't ready to be taken care of by a sugar mommy yet. After the Red Moon incident, the monetary system had been drastically reshuffled. While working at a company, Silas's monthly salary was a mere 1,000. He resigned himself to the situation, ready to make sacrifices for money. He remembered a famous hip-hop artist once saying, "Money can't buy happiness, but it can buy crazy-ass happiness." With a light heart, Silas gathered his spirits. The bus to the eastern side of Satellite Town took an hour, leading him to a cluster of low, dilapidated buildings. Walking through the streets, past a few vendors and drunken men leaning against walls with bottles in hand, Silas arrived at a small orphanage. A rusty iron signage hung on its gate reading, Red Moon Elementary School. He unwound the barbed wire and entered the school grounds. The old security guard, engrossed in his newspaper, saw Silas but didn't stop him. He lightly greeted him before returning to his reading. The playful sounds of children reached Silas from afar. Approaching a classroom, also the only classroom in the school, he saw a girl in a wheelchair, happily engaging with a group of children, all under 8 years old. "So innocent," Silas muttered with a smile. Without interrupting, he watched them for a bit, and quietly left the place. The girl thought she had heard something and looked back, but saw no one. A flicker of disappointment crossed her face. Could it be him? Had she been too hopeful? Shaking off the feeling, she clapped her hands, gathered the children together, and asked them if they wanted to sing together. The children all smiled and agreed. Soon their voices rose in joyous chorus. Silas, careful not to disturb them, gently placed an envelope inside the rusted mailbox next to the classroom door. Worried that the girl in the wheelchair might not notice it, he shifted his gaze toward the small garden behind him, plucked a handful of flowers, and laid them atop the mailbox as a subtle sign of his visit. Passing the security guard, the old guard, still engrossed in his newspaper, casually remarked to Silas, "Why don't you just tell her directly? You always leave flowers behind." He joked about how his painstakingly tended flower garden was being slowly depleted by Silas's regular visits. Feeling a bit embarrassed, Silas laughed and promised to bring the old man a drink on his next visit. The guard glanced at him, smiled, nodded in satisfaction, and told Silas he got some drinks himself and would like to return the favor to drink with him on his next visit, and he will provide plenty of peanuts as well. Silas smiled and nodded. As Silas left the orphanage and walked towards the bus stop, his thoughts turned to his dire need for money. Everything he does right now requires a lot of money. He's working his ass off, yet it doesn't seem to be enough. Recalling the time in the bar and Isabella's intense gaze just an hour earlier, she had been surprisingly impressed with Silas's handling of the cafe situation, where she called it a test. Isabella mentioned that their organization urgently needed someone like Silas to tackle contamination incidents. She then pulled out an envelope from her pocket, revealing it to be Silas's reward for handling the psychic monster incident. When he opened the envelope, it was a whopping 10,000. For Silas, even as a model employee of the month for consecutive 26 months now, he was only earning 1,000 a month compared to his mere wage. This was a fortune. Isabella, taking a drag of her cigarette, explained that the amount was less than usual, only 10,000 instead of 30,000, because they had preemptively set defenses outside of the cafe. Strictly speaking, this wasn't a solo mission. Isabella gazed intently at Silas, assuring him that with the right use of his abilities and power, money would never be an issue to him. However, when Silas looked at her gesture, expression, and looks, he wondered what exactly did she mean by abilities. Could it be? Silas's face flushed with excitement and some inappropriate thoughts. The prospect of happiness seemed almost too sudden. Isabella, observing him, then nodded approvingly, maybe not exactly understanding Silas's thoughts, and thought to herself, greed for money, danger index decreased by 10%. Suddenly, Silas remembered something important. He looked earnestly at Isabella, expressing his interest in her proposal and his desire to find a part-time job. However, although Silas was good in bed, at least that's what he thought, but all virgins are delusional. Anyway, he confessed that the ability she referred to was actually his sister's. He had relied on his sister's skill to escape earlier. Silas went on to introduce his loving family, including his father, mother, and sister, saying that they all lived together. Hearing this, Isabella furrowed her brow, her expression growing more serious. At that moment, a tiny silver metal piece in her left ear began emitting an urgent voice, instructing her to make a final assessment of Silas's words. The voice sounded terrified, also shocked. The voice told Isabella if Silas was truly suffering from severe dissociative identity disorder, indicating he could be on the verge of losing control, not only they couldn't just recruit him, they might need to eliminate him on the spot. Isabella also became anxious as she recalled the Dreamweaver who had met a mysterious end after trying to enter Silas's mind. Silas was holding too much secret on him. Her muscles tensed, her hand instinctively moving towards her gun. This seemingly harmless and innocent young man might be harboring untold madness. Isabella was unsure of what to do next. Should she eliminate this young man right away? Struggling to calm herself, she remained silent for a long while, subtly shifting her posture, her gaze sharp and focused. Finally, Isabella confronted Silas with the truth. According to her data, Silas had been living alone ever since the destruction of the orphanage. His so-called loving family, including his father, mother, and sister, did not exist. They were all figments of his imagination, just like the entire apartment building. Other than Silas, no one else lives there. As Isabella finished her words, a faint tension gripped her, her pupils subtly reddening and she was sweating profusely. She was prepared for any outcome, but before taking any action, she needed to make one final attempt to confront Silas's delusions, aware of the risk of triggering a severe reaction. Statistically, 80% of those who were contaminated with a fragile mental state could lose control when faced with the truth about their condition. Contrary to her expectations, Silas remained calm, showing no signs of anxiety or shock. He quietly admitted that he was aware others couldn't see his family. He had realized it long ago. Isabella's expression turned peculiar as Silas continued, revealing that although his family is invisible to others, he could see and interact with them. They ate together, laughed together, watched TV, and his family even protected him in times of danger. He earnestly asked Isabella, "Can you say such a family doesn't exist?" Isabella, momentarily speechless, struggled to respond. The voice in her earpiece informed her that the armed forces were ready and awaiting her instructions. Isabella struggling internally. She had encountered many individuals like Silas, but this situation felt different. The young man before her seemed sincere and composed, not the heavily contaminated individual she had expected. After a silent moment, Isabella looked at Silas seriously, seeking to understand one crucial thing. If what Silas said was true, could he guarantee that these family members wouldn't influence him negatively? Silas pondered her question thoughtfully. He knew how Isabella perceived him and had read enough books about mental conditions to understand her concerns. He assured her not to worry. His family were kind people. They won't harm anyone, including himself. When spoke about them, Silas's face lit up with happiness. He said his sister was playful and loved playing with toys. His father, a sincere man, loved cooking and always stayed in the kitchen. His mother was gentle and composed, never had a bad temper, and she much preferred to reason with others. He assured Isabella that they would never take control of him against his will. As Isabella observed Silas's earnest response, she experienced a whirlwind of emotions. Silas seemed too normal, unsettlingly so. His detailed descriptions of people who didn't exist were so vivid, so convincing, that they frightened Isabella. As the memories ended, Silas last recalled the look in Isabella's eyes when their conversation ended. It was clear that Isabella didn't believe a word he was saying, and didn't trust him at all. Silas, reflecting on that moment, shrugged off the skepticism in Isabella's gaze. After all, what mattered to him was the opportunity to earn money. As he was lost in thought, a black Jeep suddenly pulled up in front of him. Isabella, in the driver's seat, gestured for him to get in. Once inside, Isabella casually mentioned that the organization had decided to provisionally accept him. Silas was momentarily stunned, taking a while to process this sudden turn of events. She explained that as a temporary recruit, he'd need to prove himself to become a permanent member, with a base salary of $5,000 per month and additional bonuses for fieldwork. If Silas is okay with it, then sign the contract. As Silas was about to sign the paper, intrigued but cautious, Silas inquired about the job's specifics. As she drove, Isabella detailed the role of investigating and clearing special contamination sources, with assignments varying across different city locations. The tasks, she warned, were often perilous. They will be faced with powerful and terrifying monsters and could die on the job at any time. Pausing briefly, she added that since the Red Moon incident, every normal person had become precious and needed protection, this also including Silas. Silas, listening intently, signed the contract with a newfound seriousness and sense of duty. Isabella was curious why the mention of danger and possible death seemed to encourage him instead of deterring him. Silas recalled his orphanage director's words about how the Red Moon event had thrown the world into chaos, regressing civilization and collapsing order. He didn't know what life was like before the Red Moon, but he trusted the director's belief in a better world. With a hopeful smile, Silas voiced his desire to contribute to a peaceful future, just as the director had envisioned. Isabella cast a peculiar glance at Silas, one that seemed to carry a mix of curiosity and bemusement. Ultimately, she just smiled faintly, choosing not to delve deeper. She collected the contract signed by Silas and then handed him a box. Silas, with a mix of surprise and curiosity, opened it to find an ID card, a black satellite phone, a revolver, and 2 boxes of ammunition. Silas asked what the purpose of these was. Isabella explained calmly that the phone was for communication, and the only number stored was hers. At this, Silas blushed, his mind wandering to scenes from movies he had seen. Perhaps he had found himself a potent and ruling sugar mommy. It almost felt like Isabella was claiming him as hers. Noticing Silas's flustered state, Isabella called his name to bring him back to the moment. Silas, still embarrassed, face slightly red, avoided direct eye contact. Isabella chuckled to herself, thinking, "Still horny, another 10% reduction in the danger index." At a red light, Isabella leaned in close and spoke earnestly, outlining Silas's responsibilities beyond work. She emphasized that he must protect himself in daily life. If he encountered any trouble, he should first report to the security department, second, call her, and third, if necessary, use the firearm instead of his ability. Silas nodded in understanding as he got out of the car. Walking home, he mulled over his financial prospects. With his current monthly salary of $1,000 from his work and $5,000 from this new job, totaling $6,000, plus the potential extra bonuses for eliminating monsters, which would be $30,000 for a level 1 on a solo mission, and a staggering $300,000 for a level 2, he started to feel hopeful. Life seems getting better. Kicking a stone along the path, he calculated that if he spent only $500 on food each month, he could save up to $660,000 in 10 years. He dreamed of buying a large house, big enough for a teacher, a security guard, and a dozen children. Though he hadn't factored in inflation or the rising cost of living and housing prices, I'm unsure if Silas has all this in his world. Unlike our world and our economy, yikes. Anyway, back to the story. The thought filled him with hope. In 15 years, he might afford his dream home. If everything went smoothly, not only could he buy the big house sooner, but he might also be able to take Lou, the teacher, to a major hospital in the main city to treat her legs. Lost in these thoughts, Silas walked with his hands in his pockets, feeling content. As he neared his apartment, a voice from a nearby lamppost. Looking up, he saw his sister perched on the crossbar, clutching a teddy bear, her legs swinging in the night breeze. She inquired about what Silas was up to. Silas seized the opportunity to ask for her help with his new job. Explaining the need for her abilities, his sister didn't immediately agree but asked what she would get in exchange. Silas, testing the waters, suggested various toys. How about a screaming chicken? This suggestion made his sister's smile fade. He then asked, how about a drumming monkey? This time her form became blurrier, as if she might disappear any time. In a panic, he offered a dancing donkey. This time she turned away, unimpressed while pouting, and refused to talk with Silas. Seeing this, Silas yelled out, "Wait, let's talk!" His sister paused, still quite upset, silently watching him. Feeling helpless, Silas asked, "What kind of toy do you really want?" Her face lit up with a mysterious smile, and she pointed towards a dimly lit corner of the street. There, a drunken man was leaning against a wall under the dimly lit light. Silas could see him holding a bottle while peeing. Her eyes sparkled with a strange, unsettling glee. Silas's sister expressed a chilling desire for a toy that could move and talk, one she could tear apart and sew back together. She pointed to the drunk man, asking if Silas could give him to her. In exchange, she would lend Silas the powers he needed. Silas was speechless, trying to explain the gravity of her request. Hurting people was not only illegal, he stressed, but also morally wrong. Her smile turned cruel as she whispered, "Then why can others hurt me?" Silas found himself at a loss for words. Suddenly, his sister wrapped her arms around him, suggesting that if he didn't want her to harm others, he could become her toy instead. Her gaze, fixed on him, grew more unsettling. Silas could only watch in silence as his sister's fingers ripped apart his clothes and traced a long, gruesome scar along his spine, a stark reminder of past pain. Her mood seemed to shift as she tearfully asked if the scar still hurt. Her voice softened. "You've always been a fool, brother. You're the only one who would rush to protect me when others hurt me." The eerie expression on her face gave way to a gentler one, reminiscent of a simple, innocent girl. She buried her face in his shirt, her small frame trembling with silent sobs. After a moment, Silas sighed gently, placing his hands on her shoulders, and pushed her back to look into her eyes. He asked if she realized how much he had changed. With a smile, Silas shared his news. He had found a new job and could now make more money. Although he couldn't give her the drunk man, he could buy her other toys, as many as she wanted. Listening to Silas, a spark of excitement lit up in her eyes, momentarily brushing away her sadness. Tears still glistening on her cheeks, she smiled and nodded vigorously, reassured by her brother's promise. Holding his sister's hand, Silas walked to the busiest shopping street in the old city district. They visited all the toy stores, and he bought every toy his sister desired, disregarding the curious stares of passers-by and not sparing a thought about the cost. He knew others couldn't see his sister, and though their odd interactions usually made him self-conscious, today he didn't care. Middle-aged women found his behavior weird, especially as a grown man laden with toys talking to himself. Ignoring their judgment, Silas and his sister playfully stuck out their tongue at two middle-aged women, continuing to walk happily with his sister. They arrived at a bridge, piling the toys around them. His sister gleefully destroyed the toys, twisting off a puppet's head, tearing open a sunflower toy, pulling apart a teddy bear's limbs. She indulged in the destruction, her face alight with unprecedented satisfaction. Silas leaned against the railing, quietly observing her. Suddenly, his sister looked up at him with a joyous smile, declaring how happy she was today. Relieved, Silas asked if she would now lend him her powers. Rising from the wreckage of toys, she looked at him and teased that he could have used her powers at his own will all along, asking if Silas wasn't aware of this. Silas smiled and said he was aware of this, but he had wanted to ask her first and get her permission. Her twisted expression melted into a genuinely happy smile as she reached out her delicate hand to him, promising to always be there when he needed her. Under the red moon, their hands met in a gentle high five, sealing an unspoken pact. Meanwhile, Isabella drove on the highway, listening to a report about the orphanage. Knowing that Silas had been supporting it since its reconstruction, the voice on the other side pondered her decision to recruit Silas. Despite doubts from her colleagues, who labeled Silas as potentially unstable and heavily contaminated, she remained firm in her belief and decision. The other side said this was an awful choice and decision. Frustrated with their bullcrap analyses, Isabella told the other side that she will be sending over a detailed analysis to the higher-ups, then ended the call and took off the earphones. Isabella is irritated by the insinuations that Silas is just another madman in their ranks. But thinking about it, who is even normal in the entire organization? She looks back at the camera in her back seat. The footage from the digital camera showing Silas's extraordinary abilities in the subway station would likely skyrocket his risk and danger assessment in the eyes of the monitoring team. Yet, Isabella didn't regret her choice. She pulled over, she lit a cigarette, gazing at the red moon, musing that only people like Silas could truly defeat the monsters. The next morning, Silas's always gentle and elegant mother had prepared breakfast. As the three of them sat at the table, she kindly asked Silas if he was ready for his new job. His sister happily clutched her teddy bear, and Silas, smiling, said he was ready. His mother's eyes shone with pride as she lovingly gave him half of her egg yolk, reminding him to nourish himself well for the hard work of juggling two jobs. She then mentioned a gift for him after breakfast. However, the peace was shattered by the angry voice of Silas's father from the kitchen, cursing and ranting about Silas being exploited and manipulated. The family at the table pretended not to hear his outburst. The father's anger escalated as he accused others of deceiving Silas, claiming they planned to let him die and were even prepared to kill him. His rage intensified as he pointed at his daughter, saying without her, Silas would have died on that subway. This caused her to hide behind her teddy bear in fear. His eyes were bloodshot, and his father advanced toward Silas, questioning why he would still work for those who almost killed him. Silas quietly responded while eating, admitting the cafe incident was wrong and entirely their fault, but said in a quiet tone that they offered too much, he just couldn't refuse. His father, momentarily stunned by the response, exploded in further anger and lunged at Silas. But then, a bowl of porridge was thrown in his face. The mother, still composed and elegant, now displaying a cold and disdainful gaze at the father, rebuked the father for his incompetence and anger issues, causing them to all be stuck in this apartment. The father, provoked and shouting, suddenly stopped in his tracks, seemingly frightened by a simple gesture from the mother, with her two fingers extended. His fear was evident. He lowered his voice and demanded to know what is she up to. With a light laugh, the mother said he knew what was going on and dismissively told him to leave. The father, in a fit of rage, overturned the dining table with a last glance at Silas, and he returned to the kitchen. The sister seemed terrified and sought refuge behind Silas, and their mother, regaining her forever elegant composure, assured Silas that everything was fine. She then encouraged him to focus on his work and invited him to see the gift she had prepared for him. Silas's mother presented him with a new set of clothes, a sharp black suit that looked quite handsome on him. However, Silas expressed concern something was odd when he wore this. His mother, thoughtfully adjusting his collar, looked around and nodded, and then she removed his thick glasses. Leading him to a mirror, she showed him how dashing he looked without them. Silas smiled and thanked her for the thoughtful gift. His mother gently reminded him that there was no need for thanks among the family. She advised him to approach his new job with dedication and to always be polite and reasonable with others, adding with a smile that she knew her son's honest nature and the decent man that he is. Speaking of which, she gently brushed her hair and smiled again. Her smile turned tender as she assured Silas that if anyone ever bullied him, try to reason with them first. If that didn't work, she smiled and said, "Then we all will go find him together." After a day of diligent work, Silas meticulously sorted and completed all the reports and documents that were assigned to him. He left the office promptly at 6:30 p.m. He was also the first to pack up and leave his desk. His departure caught his colleagues off guard. They were used to him staying late for overtime every day. Everyone looked at Silas in surprise. One of his female co-workers remarked on his new, more handsome appearance, jokingly suggesting he might have gotten a girlfriend. Other male co-workers shook their heads, not believing that was the case. As Silas passed the director's office, the way that the director looked at him was quite strange, although Silas himself did not notice it. Wandering aimlessly through the crumbling streets, Silas realized it had been ages since he actually took his time looking around. The city, with its dilapidated buildings and tattered streets. Since the Red Moon event, the survivors within the high city walls seemed to split into two distinct groups. The first group was always in a hurry. They walked fast, eyes too preoccupied to linger on anything or anyone. Then, there were those who lived at a slower pace, often seen listlessly sitting by the roadside, setting up makeshift stalls, merely existing in a daze. Some drowned their sorrows in alcohol, while others, in small groups, idled away, smoking and catcalling any woman who passed by. Crimes were rare, and hunger was no longer a threat within the high walls, but it was challenging to build a better life. Many lacked proper IDs, which prevented them from the means to education, work, and the hope of ever reaching the main city. They drifted through the streets daily, their gaze hollow. No one knew what they were up to. Silas and his sister patrolled these streets. He did not find the monsters he was looking for. "This city is too big," he mused, finding a spot to sit down while eating his takeout. He bought his sister an ice cream, pondering whether Isabella would fire him if the city remained this normal, and he was no longer any use to her. His sister, happily savoring her treat, telling Silas that he patrols every day after work but never stumble upon anything. Be careful, or he might end up losing both jobs. After finishing their meals, they continued their patrol before heading home. His sister asked if they would be back here tomorrow. With a sigh, Silas replied, "Of course, as he needs to work hard to get a permanent position. Only then can his wages improve." In the following days, Silas continued his routine, unaware that trouble was brewing in his other job. One day his director summoned him, not for an assignment this time, but to unexpectedly inform him that he was now fired. Startled and confused, Silas stared at the termination contract laid before him. "Why?" he asked. The director, his hair half gone but meticulously combed, took a drag of his cigarette and explained the company's downturn, saying they can't afford too many for the same role. He commented that Lou, though similar in skills, has a better work attitude compared to Silas. The director also pointed out that Silas has been leaving early lately, disappearing before the day ends. Silas recalled the name and remembered the eager new employee who always sought his guidance. He protested, insisting he never left early, just didn't stay for overtime. He pleaded for another chance. The director's face twisted with regret, lamenting the loss of a loyal employee like Silas. But the company needed different skills now. Exiting the office, Silas found his belongings had already been neatly packed in a box. He then found out it was Lou who had it packed for him. Clearly, Lou was aware that Silas was getting fired. A sympathetic colleague nearby shook her head, saying Silas was too honest. She had warned Silas many times not to teach others everything he knew. Someone would take his position. She stood up, walking towards Silas. She whispered a rumor telling Silas that Lou was very clever, apparently dating the director's daughter. Silas gazed silently at his box, his hand brushing the gun in his pocket. He absolutely hates the feeling of betrayal. Yet he refrained from drawing it, recalling Isabella's advice for dealing with trouble. First, call the authorities. Second, contact her. Lastly, use the gun. Considering his options, Silas ruled out calling the authorities and using the gun options. End of the day, he wasn't insane. This only left him the choice of contacting Isabella, though he hesitated, fearing it might be bothersome or perhaps give a bad impression. But with no other solution, he reluctantly dialed the only number he had on the satellite phone. The other side answered quickly, her voice calm yet tinged with an unspoken urgency and worry, immediately inquiring, has Silas run into any trouble? Feeling awkward, Silas hesitantly apologized for disturbing Isabella, mentioning he was now faced with a major problem. On her end, a sudden movement was perceptible, as if everyone around her had abruptly stood up. "What's the problem?" Isabella asked, her voice rising slightly. Silas noticed a stark silence in the background, as if everyone had paused their activities, creating an eerie stillness. Sensing a change in Isabella's tone, his nervousness grew. He explained that he had been patrolling the streets after his company work every day, looking for the strange monsters they had encountered before. He had never left work early, always completing his tasks on time. Despite this, the company decided to fire him and replace him with someone else. There was a brief silence on the phone. When Isabella spoke again, her voice was tinged with surprise. "Patrolling? For what?" Silas quickly clarified that he had been patrolling the streets to look for the monsters and that he did this in his own time, after work hours. But it hadn't mattered. He was still fired. Isabella sounded both relieved and resigned. Asked if this was the only reason that Silas called her, Silas cautiously affirmed. Isabella seemed to have a lot more to say, but ultimately just sighed deeply, rubbing her forehead. She then instructed Silas to wait. Meanwhile, in the office, the tension was palpable. People had broken into cold sweats listening to the conversation, but knowing what was going on, the tension dissipated and they all collapsed to the floor in relief afterward. After ending the call, Silas stood outside the building, lost in thought. Isabella's words, telling him to wait, hinted at a possible solution. With a mix of hope and anxiety, he waited patiently. His eyes fixed on the satellite phone, waiting for it to ring. His sister appeared beside him, leaning gently on his shoulder. Her eyes, half hidden under her drooping hair, sparkled with a mix of excitement and concern. She wondered if that woman on the phone helped her brother. She then offered to help, asking if she should turn those people into toys. Her protective instincts were evident. She was visibly upset about her big brother being mistreated. She followed up by saying, if they tell Mom, she'd gladly help too, and maybe Dad would come to aid if he heard about this. Silas pondered her words but shook his head and decided to wait for Isabella.